Alrighty, we are live. So I'm going to give it just a couple of seconds here since I don't have an intro set up for this live stream yet. Since this is the first time we've done this, Jeff, I'm glad you could join us tonight. You going to have a drink with us tonight, Jeff?
Absolutely.
I'm going to kick off our new series with a little bit of this Larceny small batch. This is a wheated bourbon that I like pretty well. I've got two versions of this. I've got this, and I've got the barrel proof. Uh, so I'm just going to have a couple fingers of this bourbon tonight while we get things going. What are you having?
I am having Four Roses small batch.
All right, Four Roses. So guys, welcome to the new series we're going to try out here. This is uh, Thirsty Thursday live at the Man Cave. This is an idea that I had. I wanted to try out. I don't know how successful this will be. We'll see. And I'm not going to do this every Thursday. I'm going to target doing it every other Thursday for a while to see how it goes and see how things go and see what the response is, how many people are interested in this. So if you're joining us tonight, uh, leave me a comment in the chat window here. Tell me who you are, where you are, and if you're having a drink with us, let me know what you're having. And Alan, Thailand, that's a good drive from here.
A wet one, too.
Welcome aboard, Alan. I'm glad you could be with us tonight. Uh, the reason I wanted to, first of all, let me qualify a couple things here. I am not an expert on bourbon. I am no expert. I'm a newbie. I've only been doing this for uh, over a little over a year and a half now. I've been playing with bourbon tasting it on a serious level, and I'm learning a lot as I go. And I'm hoping to form a group of like-minded people here that are interested in coming in here, and having a chat about bourbon or beer. I might do beer sometime. I have a higher level of expertise in beer actually than I do bourbon because my I've got a lot of background in home brewing beer. I've done that for many years prior to getting into my barbecue hobby, and I know a lot about beer, beer tasting, beer making, beer styles, and the whole 9 yards. Bourbon, however, or whiskey, is not that much different. Hi, Mom. Mom's having some sweet tea. That's good. But I'm learning a lot about bourbon as we go, and bourbon making, to be quite honest with you, is not that far off from beer. There's a lot of similarities in how bourbon is made and how beer is made. And let me first of all, cheers. I'm gonna start on mine. This is a really good one. We'll talk about this. I'm having this one specifically tonight because it's different, and we'll talk about that. So bourbon. I wanted to talk a little bit about how bourbon's made. Typical most bourbon and whiskey is made from three ingredients plus yeast. So a lot of bourbons and whiskeys, if you go to their websites or if you Google it, you can find out what grains and a lot of times what the percentages are of those grains that go into making that whiskey or that bourbon. And most bourbon and whiskey is made from corn. Corn is the majority ingredient. Uh, then you'll have barley and rye in your typical bourbons and whiskeys. And the percentages vary from maker to maker. That's why all bourbon and whiskey doesn't taste the same. The variations in how these things are made is due to the percentages of grains that are used and some of the processing that goes on. So what happens initially in making bourbon is these grains are cracked. Like you can't put them in there whole. They need to be cracked so the inside of the grain can be exposed to the water. And this process is called the mash. They put it in hot water, and the temperature of the water is important in this role also because what happens when the warm or hot water interacts with what's inside these grains, uh, there's enzymatic reactions that go on, and these enzymes convert the starches in these grains to sugars. Some of the sugars, or most of the sugars in these cases, are fermentable sugars. So the whole process of the mash is to extract sugars from these grains into the liquid so it can then be fermented. So after this mash period is over, the liquid is drained off of the grain, and the solids are left behind. They're strained out, and a lot of times, here's an area where I might be wrong because I've not got to witness this process. They may rinse the grains again to get even more of the fermentable sugar out. You don't want to leave too much of that behind, or it's kind of a waste. So it may be washed to rinse additional sugars out. So at this point, you've collected the mash. In beer making, this is called a wort, WORT. It's a liquid that's made from the mash process that's got a whole bunch of fermentable sugar in it and flavors and colors from the various grains that you've used to make that. The next step in the process for bourbon is the distilling. Or no, I'm sorry. The next process is the fermentation. Once you have all that fermentable sugar in that liquid, they throw yeast to it. They get it down to a temperature that the yeast can withstand, and then they toss in their yeast. And most of these big distilleries use yeast from a previous batch. They've got a yeast strain that they keep going all the time, and they toss yeast to it. And over time, the yeast is the catalyst that converts those sugars to alcohols. The yeast consumes the sugar, and the byproduct is alcohol and carbon dioxide. And the carbon dioxide just rises to the top and escapes through whatever the one-way valve on the fermentation chamber is, and the alcohol is all left behind. So these are high alcohol tolerant yeast strains that they use for fermenting this kind of stuff. It's not like a beer yeast, but whatever the time process is and however long it goes, it ferments down to the point where it really can't consume anymore. And there are probably some small amounts of sugars left behind that are unfermentable and that just don't ferment through the process. So that's part of the character. I don't know if Jeff, do you know anything about bourbon fermentation?
Nope. Moonshine. We can talk about.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it ferments down to a gravity of 0 or below or not. It might, or 1.0 or below. But yes, moonshine. Moonshine is what you have at this point. Or no, well, it's fermented. Then the distillation comes along, and what the distillation process is that fermented mash. You heat it up, and as you heat it, the alcohol vaporizes at a lot lower temperature than the water does. So you've got a warm liquid that's being heated. The steam rising off of that liquid is mostly alcohol with some of the water as well. And it goes up into a condensation tube where it condenses at a cooler temperature, and the runoff of that is collected in a separate vessel. And that runoff is very high in alcohol, way higher than what's left behind. And some of the distilleries, I don't know if all of them do this. This is one of the areas, like I said, I'm a newbie at this. I'm not an expert. I'm weak at it. So it may be some distill more than once. It may go through a distillation process several times. They'll collect the distillate off the first run and then distill it again to further increase the alcohol content. And they keep collecting this until they're finished with the distillation. And what you have at that point is moonshine. That's exactly what moonshine is. Moonshine is whiskey or bourbon that has not been aged. It's right out of the still, and it's clear. It's not colored at this point. It may have some color now. Some distill here's one of the differences. I know I wanted to talk briefly about the difference between bourbon and whiskey, and I'm not going to get into an argument on this because it's what it is. It's a matter of pride between the people in Tennessee and the people in Kentucky. Uh, there there's not a whole lot of difference, but there are process differences, minor process differences. Tennessee whiskey, like Jack Daniels, for instance, uh, after the distillation, one of the things that defines a Tennessee whiskey is that moonshine that's been made before it goes into a barrel to age. It's run through charcoal filtration, and that's one of the specific characteristics about Tennessee whiskey. If it's called Tennessee whiskey, it's been through this process. Uh, Kentucky bourbon is not filtered that way. It's not filtered at all, in fact, that I'm aware of. Once again, I could be wrong there. So, yes, Honorog here says that fermented mash has to be strained before the distillation. That's correct. And Honorog, I don't know if it strained. I think it's strained before the fermentation as well. I don't think you ferment. I could be wrong there as well. I don't know. I've not seen it done live. I'm going to go tour a distillery that's not far from here and see. I'm going to learn this. I know with beer, we strain the mash before we ferment. We don't ferment with the solids in there. We take those, we strain that out first. And I'm kind of assuming that bourbon and whiskey's done the same way. Yeah, and first distillation isn't high proof. And if I remember correctly, when I was at Jack Daniels, I think they said they go through a triple distillation process out there. I could be wrong on that. I'm not 100% sure, but they have the moonshine at that point. And what happens next is what really differentiates a lot of characteristics of bourbon and whiskey. Uh, Bourbon and whiskey that's made here in the United States, most of it, or in fact all of it, it's aged in charred oak barrels, or maybe not. Maybe some of them are not oak. Maybe a lot of them are. I know the Jack Daniels, uh, some of their some of theirs is oak, and the typical aging time is 4 years. And as you're well aware, some of them are a lot longer. But those barrels are made specifically for the purpose of aging bourbon and whiskey, and they're aged in these warehouses, and they call them ricks where these barrels rest horizontally, and they're not moved any during this process. But through the climate, and if you're familiar with the climate in Tennessee and Kentucky, we're in a region out here in the East Coast where we have very warm summers and fairly cool winters, and the temperature changes throughout the seasons and throughout the day even causes the temperature in these warehouses to fluctuate. They're not climate controlled. They're designed to breathe. They're designed for temperatures to go up and down in these, and it causes expansion and contraction of the liquid itself and the wooden barrels that allows the the moonshine that's put inside that barrel to interact with the wood and the char that's on the inside of that barrel. And the char in there is what gives bourbon and whiskey its distinctive color. This comes from the char. The char releases sugars and whatnot that are in the wood that allow that to interact with this and create these colors. So when we took the tour at Jack Daniels, our tour guide, in my opinion, is the most knowledgeable person on whiskey and bourbon that I have met so far. He said that he feels, this is his opinion, that aging of bourbon and whiskey that's made here in this region in Tennessee and Kentucky kind of peaks at about the 9 year point. He says he doesn't believe that it really gets significantly better beyond 9 years. But when I asked the question about that time frame, when you're comparing it to stuff that's coming out of Scotland and Ireland, that's the sought after stuff, out there is 12, 15, and 20 years old. And he says that's correct. And he said the reason is the climate over there, the temperature variations over there are not like the temperature variations we have here. He said one year in one of our warehouses here is about like 2 years in one of their warehouses because the temperatures don't fluctuate as much, and the whiskey inside their barrels is not interacting and not mixing and melding and sucking flavor out of those barrels as quickly as it is here. So that's one of the reasons that longer aging is more popular in Scotland and Ireland. Another thing I found interesting that he told us is in the Scotch and Irish whiskeys typically are not made in new charred oak barrels. And I was really surprised to find out that Jack Daniels and probably quite a few other distillers here in the United States sell boatloads of their once used barrels to the Scotch and Irish whiskey makers and they reuse those barrels to age their whiskeys. Jeff, had you heard that?
Yep.
Yeah. So the Scotch whiskeys, which I want to talk about briefly, I know even less about Scotch and Irish whiskeys than I do about American bourbons and whiskeys, but they're aged in the used barrels. I don't know. There may be some over there that are working in new barrels, but I think most of the major ones are buying used American barrels to age their whiskey. Now, I'm not indicating in any way that makes it less than what it is. That's not the point I'm trying to make here. I'm just trying to make that distinction that that's how they do it there. Now, let me see where I should have made myself a flow chart of where I wanted to go in this conversation. I'm just rattling stuff off the top of my head here. But that's how whiskey is made. And once again, I said the three grains that are most commonly used in American whiskey and bourbon are corn for the majority, then rye and malted barley. Or I don't know if it's even malted. I know it's barley. Malted barley's a slightly different animal, but once again, it's one of the areas I'm not as good with. But this bourbon right here, this Larceny, is one that I particularly like, and this is what's called a wheated bourbon. And this bourbon is made from corn, barley, and wheat instead of rye. There's no rye in this. Rye brings a specific flavor note. It brings a spiciness to the bourbon and whiskey, and this doesn't have that. This is definitely a sweeter bourbon, which we'll talk about some more. I think a sweet bourbon is a good bourbon for beginner to learn on. So
John,
yeah,
trivial fact. Did you know that bourbon barrels can only be used once by law?
For bourbon, yes, that's true here. If it's gonna be called a bourbon, there are laws about how bourbon is made here.
That barrel is good for 60 plus years.
If you want to understand the difference between whiskey and bourbon, I suggest you go look it up. Bourbon has a bunch of laws associated with it that are on the books. If you want to call it bourbon, the only one I found kind of interesting is to be called bourbon, it doesn't necessarily have to be made in Kentucky. It can be made other places, but it has to follow the specific rules.
51% alcohol.
51% corn. It's got to have 51%.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. That's right. 51%
corn in the grain bill to be called a bourbon. But the funny thing is most of these have way more than that. You won't have any bourbons. I don't know if you can call it bourbon if you've got a rye. There are some 100% rye whiskeys out there, and I don't know if those can be called. I don't think those can be called bourbons. So there are some grain bills that are nothing but rye, and I haven't tried those yet. I'm going to, but we'll get to that down the road. So the next thing that happens when this aging is completed, and I know more about Jack Daniel's process than anybody else because I've been to their distillery. So 4 years is the typical aging length for Jack Daniel's. the old number 7, and we'll talk about the various levels of Jack Daniels here in a moment. But once that aging process is done, there's several things that happen. The Jack Daniels old number 7 is their baseline whiskey. You know, it's the Jack Daniels Black Label. I keep that on hand here. I drink it occasionally, but I use it to cook with. It's an excellent base whiskey, and all of those barrels are a group of the barrels. They're all emptied into a large vat of some sort, and then they add water to that to bring it to 80 proof. The Jack Daniels Black Label is 80 proof, so it's 40% alcohol. It's a lot higher alcohol content than that before it's diluted, but it's blended in big vats, multiple barrels, and then it's brought to 40% alcohol or 80 proof. That's the basic Jack. The next step up the ladder at Jack Daniels is what they call Gentleman Jack. And Gentleman Jack is just like Jack Daniels number 7, except before it went into the barrels, it got to make 2 trips through the charcoal filtration process. So, and you can actually taste a little bit difference. It's a slightly smoother whiskey than Jack Daniels number 7. It costs a little bit more because there's a little bit extra processing involved. But that's one of the things that differentiates one whiskey from another is how it's treated. The next, Jack Daniels has got a couple other. I want to talk about the single barrel select next, which is one of my favorites from Jack Daniels. Anytime you see single barrel on a bottle, there will typically be information on the bottle about what barrel and what warehouse that bottle came from, and those barrels are not blended together before they are diluted with water. Everything that you get in that bottle came from one barrel, and the Jack Daniels single barrel select is not diluted to 80 proof. It is diluted to it's 47% alcohol. So it's a little less. This is an empty bottle of the single barrel select Jack Daniels. It's 47% alcohol instead of 40%. So one of the things that comes along with that is it's less diluted, so you end up with a richer flavor, but also you end up with a higher alcohol content. The flavor that comes from all the natural stuff is not as dilute. So it is a more complex flavor most of the time when you have what's called a single barrel. And the next step up the ladder from that is single barrel proof. And I've got a partial bottle of the Jack Daniels single barrel proof here, and it's 130 proof. Or I'm sorry, yeah, it's 130 proof. It's 65% alcohol. It's out of a single barrel, and it's not been diluted at all. It's in terms of flavor, it's the richest and most complex flavor you can get from Jack Daniels, but it's also extremely high in alcohol. So that covers basic whiskey, bourbon, single barrel, what you're getting when you get single barrel, and what you get when you get barrel proof. Well, there may be something here. I may be overlooking barrel proof. The Jack Daniels is single barrel proof. I don't know if all distilleries do. If you can buy barrel proof or what they call cask strength from various distilleries and various brands, but I don't know if it's single barrel. They possibly could blend multiple barrels and then not dilute it. I don't know. That's a question I'll have to ask somebody if all of those are single barrel or if they're any of those are blended as barrel proof. But each step up that rung, you're getting a higher alcohol content, which presents another set of problems. And one of the things I want to talk about tonight is the process of learning to taste bourbon, because this is something that I had to go through. And I don't know Jeff, do you remember the first time you tasted whiskey?
Yep.
Did you like it?
Nope.
Do you remember the first time you tasted beer?
Yep.
Did you like it?
Nope.
Well, how is it now that we can sit down and enjoy a beer or enjoy a glass of bourbon or whiskey?
Because now we've acquired a taste for the finer things in life.
It is an acquired taste. And learning to taste this stuff until I went to Jack Daniel's distillery when my wife and I took that road trip over into Tennessee a while back. I drink whiskey occasionally, I drink bourbon occasionally, but the only time I drank it was always in some sort of social setting. I was never interested in tasting it for the flavor. I was interested in either drinking it socially or drinking it just to catch a buzz, catch a quick buzz, which you can do. And when I went to Tanya and I, when we made a last minute decision on our way home from Memphis that we were going to swing back down to Lynchburg near Chattanooga and go to this distillery on the way home, we signed up for a tour they have called the Angels Share Tour. And at the end of that tour, we got to taste 5 top shelf whiskeys from Jack Daniels. Or I won't say top shelf. We tasted Gentleman Jack. We tasted uh, number 27 Gold. We tasted Sinatra Select. Or no, we did not get to taste the Sinatra Select. Now I'm trying to remember. Maybe there were 6. It was Gentleman Jack, number 27 Gold, Sinatra Select, the Single Barrel Rye, and the Single Barrel Proof. So I think those were the 5 we tasted on that tour. And our tour guide walked us through what we were tasting. And these tastes were very small. They were quarter-ounce tastes of each of these. So we ended up with less than 1 shot of whiskey in this whole tasting. It was a quarter-ounce taste of each of these, and we worked our way up. But he explained what we were tasting, and he explained the complexities that we were tasting, and we talked. Everybody had a chance to tell, what flavor notes you were getting. And tasting is as subjective as anything. I may taste a glass of whiskey and I may taste vanilla. Jeff may taste the same glass of whiskey. He might taste butterscotch or caramel. It's subjective, and everybody's not going to experience the flavors the same way. But the thing is you have to learn to taste the flavors. And our tour guide's name was Ron, and he was just great. And one of the things he said that really caught my attention, he says, you got to learn to taste this stuff. He says, you've got to learn to get past the alcohol burn. The alcohol burn on this stuff, even at 80 proof, which is about the lowest you're ever going to see in a whiskey or a bourbon, the first time you taste it, until you get used to tasting it, the first thing and mostly all you're going to taste is the alcohol sting when you put that in your mouth. So he gave us some tips on, if you want to learn to taste bourbon and whiskey, here's what you got to do. You got to take just a little bit into your mouth and hold it there. You don't swallow it immediately, because if you do, all you're going to taste is alcohol, especially in the beginning. Take it in there and hold it in your mouth, and hold it in there, and also taste it at room temperature. Cold bourbon and whiskey is going to taste different. And it's cold will numb some of that. Well, it will take some of the alcohol sting out of it, but it also takes some of the flavor complexity out of it at the same time. It's like eating a pastry. If you eat a frozen pastry, you're not going to taste half of what you would taste if your pastry's slightly warm. So that's a kind of a good example of what you want to do here. And drinking, this is called neat. I didn't know that. Neat means your bourbon or whiskey's in a glass at room temperature with no ice in it. So that's a good way. And he said also, if the alcohol sting is just too much for you, you want to get a water dropper, like an eyedropper, and drop 2 or 3 drops of water into it, and let it open up until some of that alcohol sting goes away, and then work your way back from there. I didn't do that method. I went through a couple of weeks of every other day or so tasting, like that quarter of an ounce or maybe a half an ounce taste. I would put that in my mouth. I'd slosh it around and hold it there until the alcohol sting went away. And when that alcohol sting goes away, the flavors that you'll find in these bourbons and whiskeys are crazy. They're some of them are truly amazing. You'll find you'll find it's like taste. It's a lot like tasting chocolate. When Tanya and I were on our honeymoon road trip, we went to Hershey and we had a chocolate tasting experience that's very similar to this. There was no alcohol sting, but it's crazy at some of the flavors you can draw out of cocoa, from cocoa that's made from various places in the world. Whiskey and bourbon are the same way. So you do that. You just have to do that for a little while. Over a period of time, you have to stick with it. You don't want to let a whole lot of time elapse between your tasting sessions, and you'll develop the taste, and you'll develop the feel and what you need to do to experience these bourbons and whiskeys. I am still struggling with that bottle of Jack Daniel's single barrel proof that I have at 133 proof or 35 proof or whatever that is. It's really, really strong, and I haven't quite cracked that one yet. I've got a couple of other barrel proof ones that are lower proof. I have a barrel proof version of this Larceny that's 100. I think it's 120 proof, and it tastes and feels like an 80 proof bourbon. It doesn't have any more alcohol sting, I think, than this bottle right here, which is 92 proof, and it just takes a little practice. You have to play with it. Jeff, what you've been? How have you learned to do this? Have you been using techniques similar to this to?
Yeah, I picked that up going basically for the same thing you went to, but I didn't go to the Jack Daniels one. I went to another one where you do the taste test and they talk about it and tell you how to really get that taste, because if you're just throwing it back, all you're getting is the alcohol burn. You're never going to get any of the notes of what it's really made. But I'll give you another trivia question. Which bourbon has the highest rye content?
Bullet. Nope. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Four Roses single barrel, 35%.
It's 35% rye.
Yep.
Does it have a special name, or is it just called Four Roses single barrel?
Four Roses single barrel.
So is it? Do you know what's its corn and malt or barley bill to go along with? Do you have the whole bill?
No, just that the rye is at 35%.
Jack Daniels is 80% corn. I remember that specifically. I don't remember what the breakdown on the rye and the barley is on Jack Daniels. And that's another interesting thing about Jack Daniels. With the exception of Jack Daniels rye, all Jack Daniels is the exact same mash recipe. There are no variations in the Jack Daniels. They all use the same grain bill. So that's another interesting thing you can see of how the process changes the flavor. If you ever get an opportunity to taste 3 or 4 different varieties of Jack Daniels, it's all made from the same recipe. It's how it's treated after the mash that makes all the differentiations in those. So the other note that I wanted to touch on briefly is Scotch and Irish whiskeys. Those, you hear talk about single malts. The grain bills in the Scotch and Irish whiskeys, unless I'm mistaken, and once again, I could be wrong, they're all malted barley. The grain bills on those are all malted barley. And the malted barley is smoked prior to the mash. It's smoked with peat from whatever region those whiskeys are made, and that's one of the things that differentiates the various Irish and Scotch whiskeys is the peat and the smoke that's made and the process. There's a couple of really good shows. I can't remember if they're on Hulu or Netflix. I'm gonna have to look those up, and when I do a future episode of this, I'll try to remember to tell you about these shows. There's a couple of really good shows online about Scotch whiskey and American whiskey, in fact, how those are made.
John, to answer your question, Four Roses uses 2 mash bills. One is 75% corn, 20% rye, and 5% malted barley. And then the one is 60% corn, 35% rye, 5% malted barley.
Right, and I remember that now from our conversation with Chris when we had him on the other live stream. We'll have him back sometime because I want to get this developed a little bit. We'll make a set of questions that we'll have for Chris when he comes back. So this is what I wanted to call Bourbon 101. This is the basics of what I know about bourbon, what little I do know, and learning how to taste it. I know some of the people, I've had a couple of people tell me since I've started doing the Man Cave Meals live stream that, hey, I'm drinking bourbon now too, and I'm really enjoying it. So I have inspired a few people to try bourbon. I also want to inspire everybody to drink responsibly and do not look at bourbon as a health improvement. I know there's a lot of information floating around out there about bourbon. How there are some health benefits associated with drinking bourbon and wine, and they're all related to your cholesterol. You know, there's potential cholesterol benefits from drinking bourbon, wine, and whatnot. But let me tell you, one of the things that they don't tell you is there are hardships put upon your liver from drinking. So I don't know if one outweighs the other or not. But if you talk to your doctor, you know this is something you should ask a medical professional about. Don't ask John, because John's a medical professional, but he's not a doctor. So if your doctor tells you to lay off the sauce, you need to lay off the sauce, because when you have your blood work done, if your liver enzymes are elevated, this can be a sure culprit of that, especially if you're taking medications. And if you are taking medications, you do need to check with your doctor before you take up the bourbon habit or the bourbon hobby. Let's not call it a habit yet, Jeff. What do you?
Not a habit.
It's not a habit. So, yeah.
You're causing me to be a habit. This is my second drink of the week. Usually I'm just a one-night drinker.
Yeah. I'm a very fortunate individual. I'm 54 years old, and I do not take any prescription medications, so I'm not having to worry about medication interactions yet.
That too will change.
Yeah, I'm sure it will, because my blood pressure is elevated already, and I'm working hard to get that in check with diet and exercise, and I'm making progress, but it's still not where I want it to be. And if I go on a blood pressure medication, it may put in some extreme limits on bourbon. So we'll see, but we'll talk about bourbon some more. We'll talk about beer. I want to do some specific. I want to talk about beer also, because I was into beer way before I was into bourbon, and I do know a lot more about beer. I know a lot more about the beer styles that are available, and I have some favorites from. This is an area, you know, everybody, there's beer snobs, there's bourbon snobs, there's wine snobs, and I've had enough beer that's made here in the United States that I'll put an American made beer up against most beers made internationally any day. Now, there are some exceptions to that rule. Some of the best beers I've had aren't made here, but some of the best beers I've had are made here too. And I know which ones they are. And in fact, I think Stephen Hickey's in here with us. I think I saw him comment. I need to get an order together, because I told Stephen I was going to order some more of the West Vleteren out of Belgium, and I think Stephen said he wanted to get in on that order. So I'm gonna try to get that going sometime soon. There's a company online that'll ship that to me here in the United States. It's expensive to get it, but it's worth it. I'm a big fan of well-made Belgian ales. I can buy some well-made Belgian ales here in the United States that are imported. And once again, there are some Belgian style ales that are made here in the United States that are excellent also.
Well, as John said, we can take one brand of drink, and we can put it among 10 people, and we can come up with 10 different variations of how much they like it. I mean, and that's the beauty of it is, you know, my suggestion to most people, and I don't know, it may not be your suggestion to most people, but my suggestion is go to the liquor store and see if you can buy it in the miniatures.
Yeah. If you can buy the miniatures, you're better off.
Buy some different miniatures, see which ones you like.
Yeah. Well, in the beginning, in the beginning, I would say buy inexpensive. Don't buy expensive stuff. Don't
Oh,
buy higher quality stuff until you get past that alcohol burn stage. Buy Jack Daniel's number 7. That's inexpensive and it's good whiskey. Buy Ancient Age. Ancient Age is the bottom end from another high end distiller. Uh, Benchmark. Buy Benchmark, the inexpensive Benchmark. That's the low end offering from Buffalo Trace, and it's good. So don't buy the expensive stuff until you get beyond that alcohol burn stage.
absolutely.
You'll be wasting good money and good booze learning on something expensive. This actually this bottle right here, this Larceny, this is easy to find, and this is a wheated bourbon. It's sweet. It's not going to be offensive in any way in terms of spiciness or sting. And this bottle's a little more expensive than your baseline stuff. I think this was $25 maybe, but if you take quarter to half ounce tastes of this, you'll get beyond that alcohol sting stage before you get halfway through a bottle like this. You don't want to don't
And,
buy don't
and that's
buy Eagle Rare.
yeah,
Don't
that's
buy,
a good note. I mean, if you sit there and you take a shot, you throw it back, you're never gonna like bourbon or whiskey or any of the hardcore liquors. You've got to learn to sip it. You've got to learn to let it sit in your mouth, swirl it around, get rid of that alcohol burn, and allow all those notes of whatever you're going to detect to come through. Because what I detect may not be what John detects, may not be what
right.
anybody else detects. And what I think is good, John may go, I'm not getting that. So it's all a matter of taste. And you got to find what you're comfortable with and what you enjoy. That's why
And
there's 5,000 brands out there.
this is a rabbit hole in terms of money as well. Uh, I'm I'm fortunate and unfortunate where I live. In North Carolina, I don't have to deal with secondary market prices of the hard to get stuff, but I have to deal with the difficulty to get it. All alcohol sales here in North Carolina are controlled by the state, and I'll never ever pay more than retail for a bottle of booze here in North Carolina. But whether or not I can get it is a different story. If I went to a state where it's not controlled by the state, I might be able to buy. I've got this bottle of Old Fitzgerald that I got in a local bourbon lottery. I paid $229 for that bottle, which is retail. But that bottle outside of North Carolina would sell, somebody would pay $1,000 or more for a bottle of bourbon like that in the secondary market. So, uh, and it's real. It may even be harder to get outside of a state like North Carolina because of that. But we have my local ABC store has these bourbon lotteries about 3 or 4 times a year. I get an email and I show up out there and I get a ticket with a number on it, and if they call my number, I get to go in and I get to pick a bottle of whatever the good stuff they've got at that lottery is that's left. And the last lottery I went to, my number was 1. I got the first pull. They pulled my number first, and I had my choice of what I wanted. So I went ahead and cashed in on a bottle that I might never get my hands on again. And I've had a glass of it so far, and I've set aside a sample for 2 friends. I've given one friend a sample already, and I've got another friend, but I'm not giving any more of that one away.
Oh,
that
and that's an interesting note what you're talking about there, John. I have some friends that live in northern Tennessee,
mhm.
north of Nashville, northeast of Nashville, just about 15 miles from the Kentucky line. And we went driving into Kentucky, and I went to 9 different liquor stores in Kentucky. Do you know how many of them had Eagle Rare?
uh, all of them are just none of them.
None.
Yeah, I don't know.
I
I had somebody.
But funny thing, John. I go there because I think, okay, I can get it readily. I come right back over into the Tennessee line. I mean, we're like a mile into Tennessee. Boom, first liquor store I go to, which is a small liquor store, they got it coming out of their ears.
Yeah.
Now go figure
Well,
that.
one of my other followers down in Australia said that Eagle Rare is easy for him to get also. So, you know, I don't know. It is what it is. I've got a supply of Eagle Rare right now that's going to last me a while. I picked up another bottle of it last week when I saw some. When I bought that Larceny barrel proof bottle, they also had some Eagle Rare, so I went ahead and grabbed another bottle of it. But uh, I'm planning to take a bottle of Eagle Rare and probably my bottle of E.H. Taylor that I haven't opened yet, and share it around a table with friends here in June when we get together down in Atlanta. So,
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to bring.
mm-hmm.
I don't know yet what I'm going to bring.
So I think a good bottle. There's no better way to deal with a great bottle of whiskey or bourbon than sharing it with friends.
Oh, absolutely.
That's the best way, you know. And
Share it and talk about it.
I'm not going to take that old Fitzgerald, but I don't know. Maybe I should. Maybe that would be the penultimate drink at that table. Let everybody have. I could do that, you know.
Get some Pappy. Get a bottle of Pappy for us. Come
I
on,
would
Joe.
buy a bottle of Pappy if I could get my hands on it. The lottery they had before this last one, they had two bottles of the 20-year-old Pappy Van Winkle.
Come
And
on, dude. You told me that you were going to get me a cask of whatever I wanted if I drank a PBR. So, remember, you're on the hook there.
a PBR. I don't mind PBR.
Yeah.
It's an American light lager is the
Should have been
style
left
of beer
the
that
horse.
PBR is, and in my opinion, it's as good as any of them.
Yeah, should have been left in the horse.
Well, you can put that same label on about any American light lager, in my opinion. Some of them are better than others, but I don't have any problem with PBR. I don't have. I drink that as soon as I drink a Budweiser, a Miller, a Coors. Any of the Bud Miller Coors group. It's all the same for me.
I like a
There's
good.
not their rice. Their primary source of starches and sugars come from rice, and that's what I don't like about the American light lager style. Rice is the main adjunct in those grain bills. I like the ones that are, the various malts and barleys and not rice. Rice is inexpensive. That's why a 6 pack of PBR doesn't cost but $4 or whatever. I don't know what the going rate on that is these days. So
He says he's yanking. I know you're yanking my chain, but I'm gonna give it right back to you.
mhm. But I like beer, and for those of you, most of you here probably don't even know it, but on the Man Cave Meals YouTube channel, way back from the dark ages, I think there's a 7 or 8 part video series I put on there of making. I made uh, an all grain home brewing project, and I made video of it. I showed the ingredients. I showed the entire process from milling the grains to the mash to the boil to the ferment and the bottling and the tasting at the end. I did. There's a video series out there if you go dig back into Man Cave Mills YouTube channel. And I may, whenever we have an episode on beer, I may pull some screenshots from that when I talk about how beer's made. Beer, in my opinion, and I'm going to catch a lot of heat for this. I think beer has far more characteristic and far more complexity and far more variations than whiskey and bourbon. There's a lot more to see when it comes to beer.
I would
And
agree with you on that, John.
yeah,
Particularly, I mean, if you take all the selection of beers, from around the world,
right.
uh, and you match those up against the selection of bourbons or whiskey from around the world, I mean, you know, one stack is 6 inches high and one stack is a mile high. I mean, it's
Well, I have several favorite beer styles, and Cindy here is talking about IPAs, and I'm jaded toward IPAs, and the reason I'm jaded toward that is here in the United States, it's like all of the brewers here in the United States have decided that all they want to do is make hop bombs. And it's like the beer drinkers here in the United States have all become chili heads. It's how hoppy can you make this beer? And I don't mind an IPA, a good IPA, but in my mind, a good IPA is not what people would consider a good IPA. Let's uh, what's one of my favorite basic IPAs that's made here in the United States is the Sierra Nevada IPA. It's the Sierra, or actually just it's the Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. It's a really good basic pale ale. I like that one a lot. Uh, but I am sick of hop bones. I don't. I could care less about an extremely hoppy beer. Now that being said, there are a couple of. I like a hoppy beer that has a big, bold malt backbone to go along with it. And one of my favorite examples of this is Arrogant Bastard. That beer is hoppy, but it has a big, rich, heavy malt backbone to go along with it. I really like that because it's got something to it besides the hops. It's got uh, a big characteristic to go with it. And beers like Guinness, the dark beers, they're all quite hoppy as well, but they have a big malty backbone to go along with them as well. The stouts, the if you ever come across one called an imperial stout, which Guinness doesn't make really one I'd call an imperial stout, but there's several other brewers that do. Those are what you call higher gravity beers. Higher gravity in the beer world means it's going to be a higher alcohol content in the end than typical. Your American light lagers, the what people in my circle affectionately refer to as yellow fizzy beers, they're typically in the 4% realm, 4% alcohol by volume. A
Yellow,
higher, say what?
yellow Kool-Aid.
Yeah, the higher gravity beers are gonna. I like to call higher gravity beers that are between the 6.5 to 7.5% alcohol by volume range. Now there are beers that are higher than that. When you start talking about something like the Belgian triples and the Belgian quads, they get on up there, uh, and those are some amazing beers as well. But the complexity is just incredible. Jeff, what kind of beer do you like? I don't think you and I have ever talked much about beer. What's one of your favorite beers?
I like a good wheat beer from Germany.
A
Uh,
Hefeweizen?
yeah,
Are there any
those
particular ones you like?
uh, you would ask me that. I'm sitting there on like 20 glasses of the thing out there in the other room. Now I can't think of the name. Damn, I'm getting
There,
old.
there's some good ones out there. One of my favorite
Hang
ones
on.
is an American made one. One of my favorite Hefeweizens is an American made Hefe from Sierra Nevada. It's called Keller Weiss. It's incredible. It's I would take that over a typical German Hefeweizen any day. The Meisel's is okay. Dunkelweiss is another good one, which is a darker colored wheat beer. But the Weiss, anytime you see that Weiss in terms of Hefeweizen or whatnot, that's a wheat beer. It's a beer that's got wheat in the grain bill, and those beers are also fermented with a specific strain of yeast that produces kind of a fruity aroma and flavor. Sometimes it's associated with a bubblegum type flavor that comes along with the yeast strain. Steven says Paul Anner. Paul Anner is good, definitely. Uh, I don't have a lot of beer on hand here at the man cave right now because I've been doing keto. I've been doing the keto thing, and uh, beer doesn't fit well on a keto diet. But I'm going to start working a little bit different diet balance here very shortly, where I can have a beer once a week, maybe if I want one. So yeah, so
There we go,
we'll
John. I'm
see.
back.
He's brought his beer. What is that?
That is a nice Hawker short glass.
Okay, I haven't had
Then
that one before.
then you
Yeah.
get these. And then if you
Okay.
really want something good, there you go.
What is that?
Ah, that's a tankard, buddy.
Yeah.
I picked that up in Germany and I can't pronounce it. but it's good. And it comes
Awesome.
in. You see the
Yeah,
size
a
of that
big
bottle?
bottle. I have a couple of favorite breweries. One of my ultimate favorite styles of beer is a German beer. It's called by two different names. It's called a Hellesbock or a Marzen, and I'm a really big fan of that. But the funny thing about it is my favorite iteration of it is made here in the United States by Rogue out in Oregon, and it's called Dead Guy Ale. That stuff is crazy good. It's one of my favorite beers ever.
Have you
And
have you
I,
had real dark German beer?
oh yeah, how dark? I mean, you get it in colors from
Uh, Looks like muddy water. That
yeah.
dark.
I've tasted about every
Put,
kind of beer style that's out there.
put the raw egg in it.
I don't put egg in it.
Uh,
Nope. That's a gimmick for me. It's like, yeah, I don't put anything in my. And I also, once again, I love bourbon so far. I'm doing well with bourbon, but I cannot stand a beer that has been aged in a bourbon cask. I don't want my beer to
no,
taste anything like bourbon. I
I don't
don't
want my
want it
beer to taste like bourbon. I don't want my bourbon to taste like beer.
exactly. And you can have all that beer that's been barrel aged in a bourbon barrel or wine barrel or whatever. I don't want it. It makes me think that I'm drinking a beer that wanted to be a bourbon instead. And if I want that flavor profile, I'm going to get it right here instead of in a beer that's trying to be something that it isn't. It's a gimmick and it sells a lot. People love that crap and people line up to get it, but I'm not. It's not my jam. I'm not going to get in that line. I don't even like the bourbons. I've had a couple of bourbons. In fact, I've got one that I haven't tasted yet that I bought, and I can't believe I even bought this. But this is Jefferson's Reserve. This is bourbon that's finished in a wine barrel or a wine cask, a Cabernet cask, and I don't know how I'm going to like that. I opened it up because I gave a buddy of mine, one of the guys that got a sample of the old Fitzgerald. I gave him some of that to try as well, and I haven't heard back from him on that one, but he did like the Fitzgerald. But I don't like that stuff. I had a bottle of that Angel's Envy that's finished in, I think it's finished in a port wine barrel, maybe. I had one glass of that and didn't like it, and I gave the rest of that bottle to a friend of mine at work, and no love was lost. And Cindy says no fruit in beer, so I'm not gonna get in that boat because I've had some beers that have fruit notes to them that I really did like. In fact, when I was learning to brew my own beer, one of the early beers that I made was a cherry stout. Uh, when I was fermenting that beer, or actually when I was yeah, it was post fermentation. I let the fermentation run, and then or no, I did it while I was fermenting. Uh, I mashed 5 pounds of cherries and put them in a nylon bag, and I put them in that wort as it fermented, and I had a beautiful cherry stout. There used to be. Do you remember the Pete's Wicked Ale, Jeff?
Yeah.
When I was young, way back when I was living in my apartment before I was ever married or anything like that. I used to love this Pete's Wicked Ale that was called Pete's Wicked Strawberry Blonde. Have you ever seen that?
Yep.
It was good, and it was nothing for me to stop on the way home from work in the summertime. I had to pass several convenience stores on my way. I drove a mile and a half from work to my apartment each way, and I passed two convenience stores that both had great beer selections. And in that hot July or August afternoon, I'd stop and I'd get me a 6 pack of that Pete's Wicked Strawberry Ale, and I'd take it, I'd put it on ice, take it out to the pool, and work my way through the whole thing. So I'm not fruit's not a big issue for me. I've had a couple of what they call summertime beers that I kind of like that might have a little bit of a citrus backbone. And uh, what's the one that the Blue Moon? Have you had the Blue Moon, Jeff?
Yeah.
It's
Blue Moon.
That's a Coors version of a Belgian wit, and I think the Blue Moon has a little bit of a citrus note to it that's not bad. But I don't know. It's Cindy. Once again, it's one of those things. It's a preference. I know a lot of people wouldn't like it, and I like it if it's well done and if it's subtle. I don't want something that's going to slap me in the face because I still want my beer flavor. I want the malt and I want the balance, but or actually, it doesn't have to be a good balance. I would rather if it's going to be off balance, I'd rather be on the malty side than the hoppy side. But I'd still like to keep the hops in check. I don't like them going over the top. So we're gonna wrap up tonight. I've been going an hour. I'm not gonna let this go long. But what I'd like for you, those of you who are with me tonight, if you enjoy this conversation, if you think this is something we should do more of, let me know. Leave me a comment. Say, yeah, I like this idea. If you've got some ideas you'd like to discuss or like to hear discussed, let me know what they are. And we'll go from here. Like I said, I don't know whether this live stream is going to make it or not. We'll have to see. We've got a fairly decent group of people here tonight. Had some good feedback. So uh, we'll see. And I can probably get different guests that we can have on here periodically to help us learn. And like I said, I'm not an expert. And I don't claim to be. I want to make that clear up front as well. I'm just trying to share with you my opinions and what I have learned, and hopefully introduce you like tonight. My main objective tonight is if you're interested in learning to taste bourbon, I wanted to talk about how I learned to do it and how I'm still learning to do it and what's working for me and what isn't. And get you into the right frame of mind and right approach to learning to taste bourbon. And don't go off the deep end on buying expensive stuff until you figure out if it's something you like, because you could learn to taste bourbon and very easily decide, well, that's something I don't like, and you wouldn't be the only one. So don't feel guilty or left out if you don't like bourbon. It's not something everybody's going to like. uh, so here we go. Al, glad you could make it here with us tonight. Robert, yeah. So, but when I learned, like I said, when I learned, I did all of my learning on Jack Daniel's number seven. I got to the point where I felt comfortable with the flavors. The flavors that I was able to distinguish with Jack Daniel's number seven before I bought anything else. And that's another reason to start low, because if you start with the higher end stuff and learn to taste that, then most of everything you taste below that's going to might be a disappointment in some way. uh, let's see. Mike says he wouldn't mind Friday night moving to Thursday for the summer. Yeah, I know people do. Uh, I don't know. We'll poll the group. Maybe I'll poll the group tomorrow night and see what they think about that. I can do that any night. I could move the live stream to Thursday. I'll ask. Thanks for bringing that up. And if I don't remember to do that, remind me tomorrow night, and I will bring that up and see if there's any consensus on whether or not I should move it. I know Friday night's not convenient, but the thing to remember is if it's not convenient, you can always watch the replay of it. This doesn't have to be watched live. It's still available on YouTube, on the Man Cave Meals YouTube channel, and on the Man Cave Meals Facebook page. You can watch it all as a replay if you can't catch it live. And if you have a comment or a question, you can still leave your question, and I'll get a notification that there's a new post there, and I'll go look at it, and I'll try to entertain those questions even after the fact. So, yeah, and guys in the UK, I'm in a catch-22 here. I know it's late for y'all, but the earlier I make it here, if I bring it any earlier here, it's before the end of the workday on the West Coast here in the United States. It's the guys out in California are 3 hours behind me. So if I starting at 8 o'clock here on the East Coast, it's it's 5 p.m. in California and Washington and Oregon out there. So it's a catch-22, and that's why I moved the Friday night one from 7:30 to 8:30, so I actually brought in a larger audience from the West Coast live by doing that. And I do, yeah, there's since this audience is not just localized, it's difficult because we've got people watching from Europe out to Australia, and as you saw, we have Thailand in here, Asia. We've got people in many time zones that float in and out of this. So, Mike,
somewhere.
Say what?
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah, Mike, I understand the problem. I just don't have a good solution to it. Where I'm trying to maximize who is available to watch it live, and since a majority of my audience is in the U.S., I'm trying to accommodate that one as much as possible. But we'll see if we can figure something out. I think I'm back to 5 hours. There's I have a hard time knowing exactly where I am with the UK because sometimes I'm 4 hours off the UK and sometimes I'm 5 hours off. I think most of the time I'm 5 hours off of GMT because they have that British summertime over there, kind of like we have daylight savings time here. I don't know exactly. Their schedule's not quite the same as ours, I don't think, but Jeff, it's complicated.
Yep.
Why can't it be easy?
And the problem is not everybody observes daylight savings time. Some of them have some nomenclature of different times. So I mean, you just got to look at the clock and see what it does.
Yeah, it's kind of like Arizona. In the United States, Arizona doesn't recognize daylight savings time, but what they do is part of the year they're on Pacific time and part of the year they're on Mountain time. So they're not recognizing daylight savings time, but they're still they're just switching between two time zones. So it's it's really strange. I don't know if there's other states that work like that or not. I can't even keep up with it. So,
all right. Well, I'm going to sign off because I got to get up at dark 30 to go to AGC.
Yeah. Well, you tell those guys. I don't know. I don't know what to tell them. Tell them something good. I was going to get down there last week and was unable to do so. So currently, I'm not planning to be back down there until the event weekend. So we'll see what happens. And I've got your bags, your Umai bags.
Cool.
Right here. They're ready to go. So I'll have those with me. So you can try some dry aging if you want to with these. And next week, well, I'm gonna save that. That's cooking talk. I'm not gonna talk about that till tomorrow night. But I've got some dry aging updates tomorrow. So, all righty, guys, I appreciate you hanging out with me, and we'll catch you next time around.